permanent biological contamination of the Gulf. And the whole part of this is to let everybody know this sickness and these skin boils and the ulcerations on the skin and untreatable viral and bacterial pneumonia of new species of viruses and bacteria causing untreatable pneumonia and organ problems, kidneys shutting down, liver shutting down. These are all genetic signs, and that's why it's untreatable. And after the next half hour, I think you'll understand that, and you'll understand why my internet site was shut down on and off for 3 days with denial of service attacks. But we had a real struggle last week trying to keep things going because, this article and the one before about the perfect genetic storm, when that came out, all of a sudden we had attacks from computers all over the world and against our even against our database. Somebody figured out how to clog up our database, which is on a separate server. So our provider for our site had a little bit of a rough time for a couple of days, but everything got straightened out and they were able to stop the attacks. And the reason that happened is because of the previous report, the perfect genetic storm, synthetic DNA, and the Gulf Blue Plague, that was the name of it. And now with this report, permanent biological contamination of the Gulf. All right, here we go. Listen up. It's archived. Listen to this until you understand it. While natural viruses and bacteria respect species barriers, the storm of artificial genetics created by synthetic biology engineers in order to eliminate the flow, the flow of crude oil and gases in the Gulf of Mexico are actually designed to cross species barriers. Now that's because that's the way that they're created. It's not that they were deliberately designing the synthetic artificial genetics to deliberately do that. It's because of the way, the process that's involved. They are anti-drug and antibiotic resistant. So it's what we've got. What they've done is they've created absolutely new viral and bacterial pathogens that doctors like my ex-Special Forces medic who became a doctor who has seen a lot of stuff in the field in his Army days and now is a full-fledged physician, as he said, I have never seen the kind of stuff that's going on with people who are sick along the Gulf Coast. And he agreed. This is new viruses. This is new bacteria. When they send tests out, they're getting question marks for what it is. So that shows you it's new. His wife is also an RN, and she's saying the same thing. She works in a different clinic. So anyway, it's this is what's directly responsible for the spreading of these antibiotic-resistant and drug-resistant viral and bacterial outbreaks that we're having along the Gulf Coast. And it's a pestilence that, if you read in my articles, I call it the Gulf Blue Plague. So there's a special name for this. Besides being artificial genes, the process that happens when you're jumping species is called horizontal gene transfer. It's also named sometimes lateral gene transfer. Genetic engineering, which is synthetic biology, involves designing artificial genes to deliberately cross species barriers by invading their genetic makeup. Simply explained, it improves the direct transfer of genetic material to an unrelated species. Again, that's called horizontal gene transfer, and it's usually accomplished with a conveyance of genes by infectious viruses named bacteriophages, or most people just call them phages in the scientific community. In a typical ocean, such as the Gulf of Mexico, the most common microorganism in oceans are bacteriophages, which are basically dormant viruses most of the time. But what they're doing with synthetic biology, this genetic engineering, is using synthetic genome, the genetics, synthetic DNA viruses, which are the bacteriophages, to change the bacteria, which Bacteriophages and bacteria are different. A bacteriophage is a virus. So the virus is what controls and attacks bacteria. And the reason is because on the protein code of a virus, such as a bacteriophage, the protein code basically is sticky. So it sticks to a bacteria. And what's happening with this gene transfer, the horizontal gene transfer, is the synthetic genetics that have been placed within the virus, the phage, when that sticks to a bacteria, it changes the bacteria to whatever the genetics in the signature are in from the virus. So it's not technically mutation. It's lateral gene transfer or horizontal gene transfer. And that's kind of normal. In natural I'm talking about now. In the natural microorganism way, a bacteriophage, which is a virus, and of course naturally it will stick to a bacteria and control it. And on land, as well as in the oceans, that's a normal thing. And see, the way the Mother Nature made natural viruses and bacteria is you don't get these species crosses. You know, you're not crossing species barriers. There's that, you know, natural viruses and bacteria, they respect those barriers. But when you're using viruses that have been synthetically altered in their genes, then you've got a problem because basically you're crossing species barriers. Because once you've changed the bacteria, then the bacteria ends up changing whatever it gets involved with. Basically, I'm trying to simplify things. I got all the fancy terms, and I don't want to use them. I had to learn them all because I had researched this, but I'm trying to make this so, you know, those of us who aren't researching it, you know, can understand. It involves, by jumping even after the bacteria has been changed artificially, synthetically, going into the bacteria being eaten by things like zooplankton. And then who eats that? That's the fish. And who eats the fish? Well, the birds do, and larger mammals in the sea do, and so do we. You know, we eat the shrimp and the fish. I want you to get the idea how this starts at the bottom of the food chain within the oceans, and then also affects what's on land as well. Because once the bacteria spreads, even if it was just spreading by the birds who are eating the genetically changed fish, where they have the bacteria in them, and the plankton and such that has been genetically changed. It just goes all the way through. And it affects us directly as well as humans. It affects all the animals. It even affects plants. Once you start screwing on Mother Nature with these artificial genetic engineering, and it's proven, okay, this is not just something that I'm making up, or, oh boy, you know, I'm not saying let's go after BP because they did such a terrible thing. Look, BP is a small part of the equation of the cover-up. All right, they're only part of it. There's a whole lot more behind them that, you know, BP is not just the only bad guy. Corexit, you don't even know what's in Corexit. Find me somebody who's had a sample of what they're calling Corexit. All right, stop believing the lies that they're putting out. Anyway, so here we've got what's called transgenic DNA. Now, when you're using engineered genetic modification, you create a transgenic organism. And the reason is you're putting the DNA into a host organism like bacteria, like I just explained. And you use the virus to do that, or you can use a plasmid. Right? And this is how they've done it in the labs. The mature host organism then passes on that DNA, which has been artificially inserted into its genetics or into its genome. So this transgenic transferred DNA, it passes on to other parasites or other microorganisms. So that's the cause behind the diseases and even the antibiotic-resistant genes that make infectious diseases untreatable. Right? I hope you understand the scientific reason why. Naturally, in nature, this wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have this species jump, this horizontal gene transfer. You wouldn't have that in nature. But when you change the genetics of a phage, a bacteriophage, which is a virus, and you change it, and it attaches to that bacteria, and basically what they've done is deliberately done that so that the bacteria that are in the Gulf of Mexico will gobble up the oil and the gas, which is exactly what they've been reporting, isn't it? But they're not reporting about how they came about that. And this is how they came about it. This is new science. It's not really new, but okay, it's new to most people. Don't even know about this. So here's another really scary part. Genetic material that's released from both dead and live cells stay in the environment. Okay, just because a cell is dead doesn't mean that the genetics of it have died, because they haven't. So even a dead cell on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico ocean floor, even a dead cell, even a dead bacteria that's down there, that's not alive anymore, can transfer its DNA to anything around it, even though it's dead. And that happens in all the environments, not only in the water, also on land. So basically, our entire biosphere is right now being exposed to all kinds of brand new gene combinations that never before existed in nature and never would have come into being if synthetic gene engineering wasn't being used in the Gulf. It would have never happened any other way. That's the bottom line. But it is happening. Here's basically what happens, and I want to go into Dr. Massimo Santin's comments to my research. What we are facing is really a catastrophic biological disaster within the Gulf of Mexico. And because it's in the Gulf of Mexico, between the air and the water flow, it affects, sooner or later, the entire world. And the reason it's so catastrophic in biology terms is because the cells of all species, including those of humanity, mankind, can and do adopt foreign genetic material from dead and live cells. So years ago, there were scientists warning about this, the ones who were doing the genetic experiments in the labs worldwide. And they warned about this. Back in '99, I read a report of a Japanese scientist, and some of the things I'm about to mention came from him, and other scientists totally agreed. But according to even in '99 and before they had said it, and after '99, 2003, another report I read from scientists, the true scientific community is they've been trying to warn about this for well over 10 years. Well over 10 years. They've been trying to say, look, we have looked at this in the lab, and there's a problem. It cannot be controlled. When you start messing around and changing the genetics synthetically, you end up crossing over in species. And doing that, we don't know what the result would be. I'm summing up what they've all said. So let me give you 5 things that out of the reports that I read from 10 years ago, 7 years ago, and 12 years ago, I took out 5 things that all of them had said that we could definitely expect. Now, this comes from the genetic scientists and the biologists who have been trying to caution the world. And they've been silenced as well because, you know, they're making money with this genetic stuff. So here's the 5 things. This is what we have to look forward to. This is what's going on now. You get new cross-species of viruses that directly cause new diseases. They're crossing species. So there's the viral end. Brand new viruses, brand new strains, brand new diseases. The artificial development of new bacterial diseases. Again, it's really the same thing. You're going cross-species with the bacteria as well, but once the bacteria has been contaminated with the artificial genetics, well, then the bacteria gets gets into just about everywhere. There is bacteria everywhere. Your gut could not survive without bacteria. Now, that explains some of the GI, gastrointestinal problems, serious ones of people suffering around the Gulf right now. This is why. And these are the things the scientists, the real scientists, warned us about. Also, the reactivation of dormant viruses present in all cells. Now, let's look at that in light of us, humans. Most people don't realize that viruses such as poliovirus are dormant and are not activated within just about all of us. The problem with this genetic Frankenstein alterations is that the dormant viruses, not only in our cells, but we're talking about all of creation, even in plants. You know, the fish, the whales, everything, the birds, us, our dogs, our cats. These dormant viruses will be reactivated, and that's one of the things they warned about. I think we're starting to see some of that with activation of cholera in Venezuela right now. It's pretty much in, of course, you probably don't see it on the news, but I got a friend who lives there. Cholera in Venezuela right now is epidemic. Haiti, over 4,000 people as of last week. Of course, that's the official count. It's probably double that, and that's usually how it works in Haiti. Been there. In the UK, so-called swine flu, new strain. Don't count on it. What you're looking at is reactivation of dormant viruses, and you're seeing species jumps with bacteria. Okay, another thing that they knew that we were going to have was antibiotic-resistant genes in both viral, virus, and bacterial pathogens. We got it. That's why the people sick on the Gulf, especially the cleanup workers and those who were Vessel of Opportunities program, and even rig workers who are out there in the Gulf working on rigs, antibiotic-resistant genes. Can't get rid of pneumonia. Can't get rid of rashes. Can't get rid of skin ulcerations. Can't get rid of boils. Can't get rid of anything. It's just not working. That's why. It's because of the artificial genes. And then the fifth thing out of the summary of what I was reading with all these different reports that they were warning, the uncontrolled spread of new genes that have never before existed. You know, I thought, whoa, this is pretty nasty stuff. And when I read it, I couldn't believe that they would use that in the Gulf of Mexico. But if you look at the signs, the physical signs in a sickness, you know they have. And it was great when I got Dr. Maximo Santin, when it ended up that he had looked at my research and my articles. So I want to get into what he said. Now, he's the expert. And like I said, he did correct me in one or two things, which is good, because now I have a better understanding, so I can relay that to you. But while I was writing this article that I was just reviewing, it's my last article, I received an email from a news blog owner in Spain, and I had to translate it. My Spanish isn't like it used to be, kind of rusty. So what he was doing, he was letting me know about the commentary made by a very well-known university biologist in Spain. And it ends up, when I checked it out, he's written so many books, and his most famous, at least in the educational system there in Europe, was his paper and his book, We Are Virus and Bacteria, just explaining how we basically are virus and bacteria. And this guy knows his stuff. He was the head of the biology department at Independent University of Madrid. His name is Maximo Sandin. And his specialty was teaching on human evolution and ecology. So this is the man I'm going to quote now, who directly was commenting on my previous article, The Perfect Genetic Storm, Synthetic DNA in the Gulf Blue Plague. Now, this is his comments to my article. I believe that some, or rather many, of the activities of the biotechnology or bioengineering companies are becoming ever more dangerous each day, because their practices seem to be completely behind the back of present scientific knowledge. And I might say I might not be 100% right with the translation. I had two other people do the translation. We came up with a pretty close. One of them is almost a professional translator, so I am pretty sure the accuracy of this from Spanish to English is pretty darn good. All right, let me continue this quote. And he's talking about the bioengineering companies working behind the backs of scientists and their present scientific knowledge. Their pretensions to change genes voluntarily or to modify or interfere in the natural phenomena are based on a declining conception that does not genetically consider the ecology. These genetically modified genomes are very unstable due to the way they're obtained. For that reason, the genes are transferred to the modified or transgenic organisms that produce, now catch this, a permanent biological contamination in the ecosystems, not just ecosystem, not just the Gulf of Mexico, in the ecosystems whose effects are unforeseeable. In other words, unknown, cannot predict it. A permanent biological contamination in the ecosystems whose effects are unforeseeable. This is what we're facing. This comes from a highly respected biologist and is considered one of the top experts on bacteria and viruses. I'll continue his quote. On land, communities of associated bacteria and viruses, bacteriophages or phages, plentifully exist in the ecosystem for the purification of fresh water, the degrading of toxic substances, waste product recycling, carbon dioxide production, and the nitrogen fixation within plants. In other words, they're vital. These communities genetically exchange information by means of plasmids and viruses. The viruses control the bacterial population. For that reason, the altered transgenic genes can cross to other organisms in the ecosystem. This practice has been repeatedly denounced by prestigious and independent scientists, although the mass media does not report this. That's what I was saying, is the real scientists do not agree with the synthetic genome Craig Venter garbage. And the reasons they don't agree is because they know the consequences. They knew the consequences in their labs when they were first starting to deal with this more than 10 years ago. They understood what would happen. And I'll repeat what he said. The altered transgenic genes, in other words, going from one organism to another, jumping species, can cross to other organisms in the ecosystem, and that this practice has been repeatedly denounced by prestigious and independent scientists, although the mass media does not report it. Now, that's a real scientist who's saying, we tried to tell you. And people like Craig Venter are the minority of the scientific community. Just so everybody knows. The populations of bacterial and viral communities, I'm quoting them again, within the oceans are spectacular. It's been determined that there are 1 million bacteria and 10 million viruses per milliliter. However, for some scientists, these figures are conservative. And I had mentioned that before, that the most common thing within the ocean is the bacteria and the viruses, the bacteriophages they call them, the phages. There's a lot of them there. Now that's the microorganisms. Mankind, and you've heard all of it, that we came from the ocean. We came from the most simple microorganism and developed from that. That's what scientists say. All right, quoting again. Their functions are of equal importance for the marine ecosystems. They are in the base of the trophic pyramid for the control of microorganism populations. In the degradation of ocean waste, in the photosynthesis and respiration of the ocean, and the carbon dioxide interchange with the atmosphere, including the formation of clouds. You getting the idea how what happens in the Gulf affects everybody? In the water and in the air and in the rain? We now have news. I'm quoting Dr. Maximo again, Dr. Centine. We now have news on the methods to fight against the petroleum flow in the Gulf of Mexico. The suspicions that they had been using bacteria with synthetic or genetically modified genomes are very founded if we consider that the megalomaniac Craig Venter is involved. Now, can you get the idea that real scientists don't like him very much? Real people shouldn't like him very much either. Just love how the name of the sailboat is called Sorcerer. Oh, well. All right, now let me finish up with the professor's quote. What is being observed is not so much that the synthetic microbes produce mutations in the natural microorganisms, because that phenomenon is more of a localized problem. Well, in my previous article that he was commenting specifically to, I had stressed that mutations were responsible for what was happening. And he was correcting me, and of course he's absolutely right. The mutations would happen on a local level. In other words, it wouldn't jump species to species. Some things would mutate, but that wouldn't be a species-wide to the next species problem. It would be a localized problem where you would have a certain area that you would have these mutations, and it would pretty much stay as a localized problem. So he was correcting me with that, of which now I know that's true. All right, and then he goes on to say, the true problem is that the horizontal transference of these modified genes between marine microorganisms is taking place, and that would be a permanent biological contamination of the ocean, where the medium and long-term effects cannot be predicted. But with complete certainty, this will be a serious danger for the marine ecosystem in every area. I guess I will have to hope. But if these crazy activities go unchecked, we will end up confronting a problem for which we cannot find a solution. Now, that again is Professor Dr. Massimo Sandin from Spain, and was a professor of biology department, Independent University of Spain. Written a lot of books, a lot of papers, very well respected for his research and such on viruses and bacteria. There's his comments of exactly what is going on, what we have to face, and that it will affect everywhere. He wasn't just talking about the Gulf. He said a permanent biological contamination of the ocean, long-term and short-term effects that can't be predicted, and a certainty, not a guess, a certainty that it'll be a dangerous, serious danger for the entire marine ecosystem in every area, and by that meaning all the oceans. Comment from Michael and Cajun Michael in the chat. Thing is, all science really, they don't know for sure what they're doing in long term. It's like a bad mechanic. They just keep trying to fix things till it works for now. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Not what can happen later. They prove that time and time again. Well, Cajun Michael, you got it. That's exactly what's going on. Just exactly the way you put it. And in defense of real scientists, especially in Europe and in South America, because they're the ones that I've been communicating with and who have been doing testing. And they are so much against what's going on in the Gulf. Real scientists are. It disturbs me that if there are any real scientists in North America, I would have expected some of them to speak up by now and agree with their colleagues around the rest of the world. But for some reason or not, I think a lot of it is the same reason that people are shutting up everybody who tries to say anything who lives along the Gulf. I'm sure that they're shutting up the scientists as well. The magnitude of the cover-up that is going on, it's beyond what anybody could possibly realize. It's deep. It's like a spider web. It's touching everywhere. What's going on in the Gulf, the cover-up is almost worse than the synthetic biology. Almost. And who gets to pay for this? Well, not paying out of our pocket. Who gets to live, maybe live, and definitely die from it? Well, for right now, those of us around the Gulf. cleanup workers, even oil rig workers out in the Gulf. They're all being affected. I have a friend who's he tows barges from Mississippi to different areas in Florida and sometimes in countries in the Caribbean, coal barges. He's affected. In fact, he won't take any more of those jobs. He said, if you're going to have me going through the Gulf with the tugboat pulling a barge anymore, I quit. He's been a captain for a long time, and they can't lose him, so now they've got somebody else who doesn't seem to think it's a problem. But he takes their other jobs to the Caribbean. Anyway, yeah, it affects everywhere. And, Cajun Michael, you're right on. You got it. That's a good way to put it, like a mechanic who keeps doing temporary fixes, the backyard mechanic who keeps using a chewing gum to stop the leak, and a little bit down the road it starts leaking again, and you can't just keep putting chewing gum on it because the root problem isn't being addressed. You've got to fix it the right way. The problem with this is, when you're talking about genetics that have been altered, synthetically jumping species, it starts affecting everything. And that's what Dr. Santine was trying to get across. It just affects everything. The suspicions they've been using bacteria with synthetic or genetically modified genomes are very founded if we consider that the megalomaniac Craig Venner is involved. I wish I had said that. But I'm not a scientist, and I'm so glad that a scientist said it for what it really is. Craig Venner is a megalomaniac. But it's nice to hear a scientist say that. He is not respected within the scientific community. He's respected by the big oil companies and other companies who are paying him. And by the way, it's not just Craig Venner, but it's a few others like him. He's not the only one who's doing this. There are other private companies that are synthetically changing microbes now. So it's not just one. And you know what? Here's the kicker. This has been going on for years. Even though it was announced in May, I hate to clear, it's been going on for years. And that's what scientists in South America and Africa have told me. It's nothing new. The new part is they decided to use it large scale within the Gulf of Mexico to alter bacteria in order for the oil and for the gas to be eaten up. And it looks like they're somewhat successful according to their mainstream media news reports. Oh my gosh, the oil plume is it's being eaten up. We don't understand how this can happen. And then they get Terry Hazen, scientist at Berkeley Labs, which is a government lab, by the way, out in California, and he makes statements like it's being eaten up faster than expected. Well, okay, it's faster than expected. Natural bacteria couldn't possibly do it in a time frame, and every scientist knows that. Now then, you get little kind of statements from people like Mike Utzler at BP. Let me go play that. This is on BBC United Kingdom Broadcasting. And right now we can't access their original recording of this on the internet. If you have a North American IP address, you can't access it anymore. Good thing I caught it when I did on December 1st. Listen to what BP says.
The plume is actually disappearing. The plume is being biodegraded. That there is a new form of microbiology that is attacking this plume and using it as a food source. Just to bring it back to the... Okay. Thank you.
How do you like how they cut him off? Oops. You just spilled beans. A new form of microbiology is eating up the plume. A new form. Does that sound like natural? Nope. A new form. Listen to those English words. When somebody says something is a new form, it means there's nothing else like it out there. What could that be when you're talking about microorganisms eating up the oil? It has to be bacteria or viruses. A new form of microbiology. It's exactly what he said, and you know darn well what he meant. A new form. A new form has never been seen before. I gotta play it again.
The plume is actually disappearing. The plume is being biodegraded. That there is a new form of microbiology that is attacking this plume and using it as a food source. Just to bring...
And see, right after that, they cut him off. His own people at BP cut him off. He was being interviewed by BBC Two, the United Kingdom television and radio. That kind of settled it for me that there was no doubt that this new form of microbiology, you know damn well what it is they were using. If it didn't come from Craig Venner, it came from one of the other private companies that do the synthetic biology. That easy. Not hard to figure out, is it?